Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on global trade. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith and Mr. Mike. Mr. Mike, what you want to discuss about global trade? And now we have lot of challenge because of war. What will happen for supply chain?
Um, my impression is that the huge disruptions are relatively have calmed down, and there's not as much of a impact. We had both the COVID and then followed by things like the Evergreen being caught in the Suez Canal, did a lot of disruption to the global trade. Um, Now that China is going through their COVID moment. So I don't know. Maybe I'd ask the question to David too. Those were some of my perspectives. But David, what do you see in the global trade and what's going on?
Mike, thank you. The global trade is a very interesting topic because there are many different opinions on whether it's good or bad for different companies. And we saw during the COVID that this topic of global trade actually has been brought up quite a bit in different veins of discussion. Um, you sorry, the whole area of international trade and global trade is one that has changed how we see things. Here in the United States, I can walk into the grocery store and I can find products from many different parts of the world. Night before last, I had Argentine wine. I have Costa Rican bananas. I get products from Brazil, from Europe, other places like that all the time. And we see that international trade allows countries to expand their markets and really access goods and services that might not be available domestically. Um, Ultimately, international trade should be more competitive prices and bring benefits to the companies. Um, it was interesting though. Adam Smith was the one, as a political economist, who really pushed the importance of international trade. And some actually argue that international trade can be bad for smaller nations, putting them at greater disadvantages. Also, you can argue that the smaller companies have benefit from it. One of the challenges we saw with global trade during the pandemic was that the supply chains have been tremendously disruptive during that because of shipping problems, worker problems. Also, we saw countries at disadvantage because they had lost all domestic capability to produce products. And one of the big outputs from global trade as part of the pandemic is there's been an ongoing effort to establish local production capabilities in many of the countries around the world because of the inability to uh, depend on foreign suppliers and foreign materials and the shipping and logistics of how that can be used to support the business and capabilities. Um, so the whole area, Sharif, of global trade has been dramatically changing as a result of COVID and of the potential other natural disasters and things we've seen over the last 2 years. And it's one that I think we're going to continue to see disruptions in. Is global trade important? Yes, it has totally changed the dynamics. Because of digitalization, ubiquitous communication, global trade is a lot easier now than it was 100 years ago when we did not have the same type of direct communications, when we could not link computer systems because there weren't computers back then. But even then, we can now, in a global trade environment, a global manufacturing environment, uh, we can look at where we find the best sources of competencies and capabilities to do work. But we've also seen with many of the large multinational companies that there's benefits to segmenting production and at least looking at different geographical regions of the world to duplicate capabilities so that some of the challenges of shipping, some of the challenges of customs, some of the challenges of customization, personalization by geographic regions has lessened. But we know that the global trade is just tremendously important in today's world, but it is one where, like I said, is undergoing big changes right now. For example, the amount of time it takes to build a new manufacturing plant and get it operational and certified in about 2 years. So that began during 2020, 2021, and we're seeing them coming online now and being certified. So even the global production capability is changing, which will be impact the future of global trade. So, Sharif, I think that might be a good introduction from my side.
Yes. Mr. Mike, I have few concern about social media because now for global trade, social media playing a very important role, especially for business communications. Let's say we are organizing World Talent Economy Forum. We are seeing that from our last show, from the analytics, we are observing most of our audience, those who want to collaborate with us. We have 159 audience already attend in our show. We have professors, CEO, founders, executive directors, salesperson. Do you believe that social media can be a major relationship development platform right now for this global trade, or we can use the alternative platform as well?
Um, I don't know. Let me. So I have a particular take on social media. It's really not about social. It's about mobs. So I call it mob media because it's all about you know. It, you see a lot of harassment. You see a lot of bullying. Even the notion of likes and dislikes and the way that it can change the discourse. It's really not about socializing. It's really about influence peddling and pushing a particular view. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of people paying for misinformation. So I think it'd be used by state actors and political organizations to really, create something that's not there. And remember that social media is driven, or mob media. Let's call it mob media. Mob media is driven by the economics. It's driven by the people that can make money. And if you have that, and the way that you make money is you get people hooked. And if people and they're hooked because they're human, and they're human, and a human is going to be hooked because they're trying to blame somebody else. They're trying to create fear and uncertainty and doubt. So it's more than like if it bleeds, it leads. This is more than that. It's just saying like, hey, whatever's popular is going to be that, and the social media, what's really scary, it's taking over how people absorb their news. So it's not coming from reputable sources. It's coming from, just mob. And I think I'll get off my soapbox on mob media now. But back to trading, I guess I would say I'm not sure how it influences, other than I think it has potential to be very deadly, especially we can't confirm whose identity it is. You don't know who's really talking. You don't know whether it's a computer system. You don't know whether it's an AI, a chat bot, a Russian, a farm of mob media. So it's dangerous. It's destabilizing, and it's dangerous.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, this is very interesting views. So, Professor Rob, what you want to discuss?
Well, I'd say on getting back to global trade, if I can say, like, I think if we look at the negatives, we can say that rich countries can exploit low cost production anywhere in the world. And so it also is in the United States, it gives China a direct access to US consumers through platforms like Amazon and Alibaba and stuff. So on the good side, it has lowered the cost of shipping. Ideally, it would allow us to raise the standard of living because people have access to low cost goods. But I think what's happening is this this need for lowering the cost means that you're driving efficiencies, and driving efficiencies is you're getting these tremendously huge container ships that are also destabilizing because you're putting a lot of eggs in a little basket, and you're also making it where smaller ports can't take these large ships. So I think that's one of the things that we've seen is that, you have these larger ships and it's lowering the cost for the rich countries, and a lot of the poor countries can't participate because they don't have the resources to build ports that have the size and the capabilities that for doing these large container ships. So, and not to mention the container ships are terrible for carbon pollution and pollution in general. So these shipping vessels, a lot of I don't think a lot of the pollution is really captured in the pricing. We think it's low cost, but that's only because we're not pricing all these externalities of the pollution and the carbon emissions. So I don't know. It has some good, it has some bad. So I think what we're trying to do at Transit X is trying to change this around where you can have a new form of container that is for a particular pallet. So you can basically have offshore loading. You don't need to dredge to get large ships. So it's changing it and trying to make it more equitable for the little guys in the smaller countries and the islands, and not have this very have and have not situation.
Thank you, Professor David Smith.
The social media side is really interesting on this because it does influence both positive and on it. You know, let's just quickly hit some of the advantages and disadvantages for the global trade. One of them is it provides a foundation for international growth. I like to say outside of the personal service industry, almost all companies are global at launch because one of the first things they do is put up a website which is available globally. The second thing is that brands and businesses which really take advantage of global trade, they increase their professional performance. And because they can put their goods in multiple markets, the commercial lifespan of each of the opportunities can be extended and really amplified more. And also, it spreads out the risk as a brand and business risks that happen. And international trade encourages market competitiveness. And also, one of the real interesting benefits of global trade is that it can allow you to do arbitrage across international exchange rates and begin to look at how you spread out risk and how you protect your revenue stream. And uh, global can also give you new markets to even help brunt competition some. But there are disadvantages too. There's always a political risk involved with trade. Severe exchange rates are risk. Also, there's a lot of cultural challenges with international trade. You have to be very conscious of cultural exchanges. And international trade also gives you some intellectual property risk because we see that some countries in particular are really bad about compromising intellectual property, copying your products, not respecting some of your wishes, but you can understand that and take those risks. And some uh, countries I will not do business in because of the intellectual property risk and things. So you see, those are all advantages and disadvantages of global trade. But usually at the end of the day, some type of intellect, some type of global trade is beneficial for most companies, and particularly startups as they go grow across the first phases of their growth, because it opens them to new markets where, in many instances, there could be little competition for them, and and have that. But there are risks and challenges with that too. So it's one that there's good and the bad in it, but it's one that uh, is here to stay. even though, like I said before, it's changing in light of all the disruptions that have happened around international trade, global trade as a result of COVID. So, Sharif, I hope the advantages and disadvantages help.
Thank you, Mr. Mike.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question about tariffs and the role of tariffs, the role of in global trade, being able to protect local industries, being able to say like, okay, I'm good at these things and I'm not going to be good at those things, so I want to bring in that because I can get a lower cost. Um, and so I know in the U.S. there was you have some trade wars going on where there's tariffs being put on to try to um, incentivize. People are also misunderstanding what a tariff is. It's a tax, right? It's a tax on foreign goods. Um, so it's hard to say. Is it what will happen if you don't have tariffs, or if you just have sort of the free and open? I think business markets just want predictability and they want fairness. I think another part of that is subsidies given to local producers, right? So you can either tax or put tariffs on things coming in that may compete with local industries, or the government can provide subsidies to local industries, which is kind of the inverse of a tax. Um, so I think all those are ways. I'm not a trade expert, so I'm in transportation, so these are things from my perspective that I see that are out there.
Mr. David Smith, I think, Mr. David.
Yeah. Well, while we're waiting for David to come back on, Dr. Sharif, what are some of your views on do you have on tariffs or sort of the global trade? Like, what is because you're right now in Bangladesh, right? Tell me what's going on in Bangladesh and how is trade regarded there?
No, actually, country like Bangladesh from developing, like less developed countries, our country shifting to the developing nations. So that's why the previous quota, tariff, and many things, the benefit we get from the global market, especially from the US market and the Europe markets, now it's open. So we have to move with this uh, global competition and these things. But good point is that even though we actually not getting all of the protections, but our garments industry, they are performing well, and right now they are number one in terms of export garment accessories. But still, we need room, we need opportunity to bring new markets for our country. Uh, but when we discuss about this quota, tariff, and everything, I have students in Middle East. Definitely, they are involved with oil and gas and this kind of things, especially Iraq. What I see that their pricing of their well and everything depend on not not on their country's government. Actually, USA, uh, they actually set their price and everything. So there are many discrimination around the world for emerging economy. I saw it creates some negative impact, uh, but yeah, still we have room. We can discuss. We can go for dialogue. We can go for negotiations. That's why World Talent Economy Forum we are organizing this kind of dialogue that we can collaborate with the good people like you, good organizations like you. Uh, but still, we have to improve a lot, and we need more support from the developed nations.
Great.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, Mr. Mike.
Um,
Yeah.
well, I want to get back to the subsidies because I look at there's countries that don't have the regulations that may be in some other countries. Like there's different regulatory environments, and that's basically a form of subsidy, right? If one place has, and so that is impacting global trade because you say, hey, these folks here can produce product at much lower cost, but they're polluting the environment. Well, is it really the lowest cost production, especially when you consider all of the carbon emissions for the trade itself? So I think we need to be careful with sort of always going for the price unless the price has some type of recognition that there's pollution costs of the shipping itself. We just get kind of drunk on the low cost of shipping without thinking about its implications.
Excellent. Professor David Smith.
Well, thank you, Sharif. Sorry, I had to step away for a moment with someone at the door. Um, you know, global trade is one that has its root going back into the concept of competitive advantage. And competitive advantage is one that has, like I said before, both positive and negative impacts that can affect companies. Um, One of the real interesting things of global trade, it also allows countries to participate in the global economy. And one of the benefits I see a lot for developing nations is that as they become part of the uh, global trade environment, they are seeing more and more possibilities for foreign direct investment in it. And that from both companies, where, for example, Dell Computer establishes facilities in many of the countries which they operate in and sell their computers and products in. So that grows the local economies more efficiently, and they become more competitive as economic participants. Also, as countries begin to be involved more in global trade, you're seeing things like the World Bank, the International Development Bank, and others like that beginning to make more investments to enhance their capabilities. So you're seeing the ability to grow money into companies, to create jobs into companies, and other things as they participate in global trade. Um, and so you see it raising employment levels, and theoretically, it can lead to growth in the gross domestic product. And, you know, very often, even for small companies in small countries, the ability to have global trade offers a company expansion and growth, which means higher revenues for them. And again, going back and more employment things to make it um, happen. Now, you do have to realize that in global trade, there's a concept of free trade where there's no restrictions on it. And then you have protectionism where you see tariffs, subsidiaries, and quotas and things. Both of these approaches are used in world trade today. And increasingly, again, as a result of COVID and global conflict, we're seeing more and more protectionism begin to see and begin to impact that. And, and what we're trying to do is see what are the benefits of international trade and the need for international trade. And you see differences in technology, education, government policies, labor laws, natural resources, and other things impacting it. And that's where you see the competitive advantages to them. And, this is one of the great things with global trade is you can exploit your benefits for it, but also there's going to a broader range of competition. So that's some of the disadvantages of global trade in that. So it's a mixed bag, but it's one that is here to stay. But we are seeing more and more protectionism coming back in place today because of the global disruptions and other things like that. And it's very impactful today.
Mr. Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say some things that are probably obvious, but we don't say them. And that when you look at the most international trade is on the seas, right? The most of, I think, I should look at the statistics, but I'm assuming that the vast majority of international trade is on marine ships. Now, some of that is food and bulk. A lot of it, consumer products, is in containerized. And I just want to point out, like, the cost difference between shipping things over the seas, where essentially the infrastructure is water, you just need to have the vehicles, versus any other over land, over with rail, or over highways, and that the international shipping, one of the reasons why it's so low is it's such an efficient, low cost way of transporting the goods that you have the have nots. Do you have access to a port, or do you not? And if you look at, in fact, Jeffrey Sachs was a Harvard an analyst that looked at Africa and why were some of the challenges in Africa. And part of it is because of just the enormous landmass that's inaccessible to low-cost transportation infrastructure, mainly the seas, right? If you don't have access to a port, then you can't really participate in this international trade. It's such a advantage. That's why in the United States, you see the East Coast and the West Coast are very rich compared to many other parts of the United States. And a large part is because it has access to ports, because access to ports means access to low cost products and goods because the infrastructure costs are so much low. So that's just keep that in mind, of that, if we create lower cost transportation infrastructure, it's opening up more of the world, and the more that we can have that low cost transport infrastructure, the better off. I think China's looking this in their one rail or one road infrastructure, where they're looking at trying to do rail across Asia and even Europe. I know that's what we're looking at when we look at things like, how do you create that low cost infrastructure that isn't dependent upon marine shipping? So, but we are dependent very much on these gigantic ports, and it's getting more and more disruptive that these big ships can't land at many ports. So you really have the have and have nots.
Mhm. Thank you. Professor David Smith.
Well, Sharif, he is 100% right in that as and how it impacts all the different sides of it. Um, and you know, the other thing we saw is that global trade also involves different types of transactions, such as bank guarantees, um, and other ways of trying to look through and see how it works, how we benefit across the international borders, and how do you create the economic opportunities. Um, and the World Trade Organization is one of the main bodies that regulates global trade and tries to ensure that it works among its 164 different countries that are part of it. And we're also seeing that specialized financial platforms such as Swift and others have been put in place to help ensure that the money flow works across this global trade. And we're seeing platforms now be coming in place to help us begin to look at how to balance this trade through the multi-type of things. And it's a very interesting uh, tracer. And the we're trying to overcome um, some of the challenges of global change by looking at how to put together collaboratives, uh, strategic partnerships to begin to work there. And uh, we're seeing many new technologies. We're seeing uh, different type of blockchains begin to be used to help bring more transparency to it. But technology is heavily impacting global trade today. Even the ability today that we've seen come online in the last year to track shipments in real time particularly because of all the global logistic disruptions we've had and how those can be used today. So, like I said at the very start, global trade, it has been a mainstay for quite a while, but in just the last 3 years, we've seen some significant shifts going across the global trade environment, and with countries beginning to re-examine their um, commitment to local production capability and looking at ways to optimize their logistics to optimize themselves. We've just seen tremendous disruptions, like in the chip industry, where many of the chips came from Asia, and the garment business, and even things like the ability to get lithium ion for batteries and things has been disrupted as a result of COVID. And we're seeing the adjustments on that coming in place. And within the next year, I think we'll see a very different environment as more and more local production capability comes on board. So, Sharif, I hope that helps. And Mike, it looks like Sharif might be
Thank you.
frozen.
Yeah. I'd like
Thank
to
you. Mr.
point
Mike.
out, and maybe, yeah, when we're talking about global trade, I think a lot of the transports are about energy. We're transporting oil and coal and natural gas. And, I don't know how much David and Sharif, you look at that as part of the global trade, but that's a huge part of it. And my perspective is that, look, the sun is blessing us with, well, some people call it sunlight. I call it a intermittent global worldwide wireless power distribution system, because it's the power of putting energy everywhere in the world with both solar and wind. And I hope that, and it looks like the cost keeps on coming down dramatically on those. And I hope all the misinformation from the coal and natural gas and oil industries um, aren't successful in this very rapid transformation. Because I think if I hope people can see it. It doesn't make sense to transport energy when the sun is transporting that for free globally wirelessly. So I hope we understand and we can move to that direction, because all of the things that we're trying to transport, and God forbid, I hope we don't start transporting hydrogen. But so energy should be available everywhere, and using it as part of the global trade platforms. You know, it may be a transition and it may be necessary for now, but there still needs to be a very strong motivation to just saying, let's go to renewable resources so we don't have to use our resources for just transporting energy around. And I also just mentioned, and maybe something to think about, is how does global trade be impacted by the climate change, from the rising seas, the ports that may be, that have to have a certain water level, the heat waves, the fires, that's impacting, food production and food transport, the war in the Ukraine. So these are things to think about. So both climate change as well as energy shipments. Looks like David may
Yes,
have had
David.
this.
I think he has meeting. Yeah.
Well, so let me ask you, Dr. Sharif. I mean, how do you look at sort of like the energy in global trade? Does that sort of factor in? Like, is Bangladesh moving? Are they building coal, or are they building solar and wind, or how's that? What does it look like?
Recently, Bangladesh Prime Minister, she visit Qatar. I think they're working with the Qatar government for investing in energy sectors. Uh, Also, the Qatar Foundation, they are working research and innovations. Mm, that is one of the way. But if you see the overall the situation of Bangladesh, we do not have enough natural resources. So definitely we have to figure out the alternative source of energy. So that's why we believe that if we focus on research and innovations, it may help to solve our energy problem. But definitely your transportation system, it has some unique opportunity to run the system. So, what's your thoughts? Is it
Well,
affordable by Bangladeshi?
if you're going to a top oil producer and asking their opinion about energy, I could imagine, it's very easy for them to say, "Oh yes, natural gas has a future, and you should, still invest in oil and coal." I hope that's not the case. I hope that Bangladesh can see that energy is being dropped on Bangladesh every day with sufficient amounts, and the advantage of being able to invest in the renewable energy from solar and wind gives you all the energy that you'll need. And it's just a matter of having the cost and having homegrown production of that, because Bangladesh and every country has enough natural resources when it comes to energy, by far. With battery technology and with renewables, you certainly have enough. You don't need the oil and natural gas, especially if things like Transit X, we can put this and eliminate the carbon emissions and the use of fuels from your transportation sector. That will go a long way to reduce the consumption of oil.
Mhm. Excellent. Mr. Mike, do you believe that country like Bangladesh, when we have shortage of many natural resources or many things, so technology like Transit X can be beneficiary for our transportation industries, or we can afford it, or we can manage this kind of technology?
Well, like any technology, it's sort of do countries use it as a competitive weapon, saying they're trying to keep that technology, or do they say we need to have local production? And for example, in Transit X, it's our view is that you were trying to raise the global happiness and quality of life, which means you're not just saying, oh, it's a U.S. technology and will always be made there. When we look at, let's say it this way, in Bangladesh, I would submit that you have plenty of energy. Now, when it comes to natural resources, there's like energy and let's focus on just energy. So you have plenty of energy, especially if you have a transportation system that takes up 10 times less energy. Now you don't need to build solar farms and wind farms just for replacing the gasoline. So I think that's a key thing, is that efficiency gets you a lot further than anything else. If you look at just over the history, it was efficiencies that are driving this really this rapid change, and the cost of renewables, right? The cost of wind, the cost of solar panels, these new thin films that can be locally manufactured. All these are very powerful movements towards having great natural resources, such that companies can relocate, because one of the barriers to companies building local capacity is having reliable energy. And so if we can build a new grid 2.0 based on distributed renewable energy sources, then that's a very attractive thing for businesses to locate, where they can find both the energy and they can also get workers there. And so those are the two things that from my company is that we're working on, is that how do you build a transportation system that can not only use renewables but actually generate renewable energy, and how do you expand your worker markets, because now companies can relocate and have workers be able to safely, efficiently, quickly be able to get to factories.
Excellent. When we're discussing about global trade, so negotiation is a very important thing. Do you believe the less developed countries they have ability to negotiate with the developed world, or what type of strategy developing nations or emerging economy should follow to make an effective business negotiation?
The short answer is I don't know. Um, I
Okay,
think
okay.
there. I do think, though, that when you look at the finance and you look at the legal systems, there's a lot of things that you can do with both legal and financing that are a disadvantage if you're not in that space. And so I would guess that that is similar to negotiations, that there's negotiations, but then there's the legal framework that can enforce whatever the laws are. So, and I think right now, the cost of doing business for just moving money. I've had in my business terrible times just moving money, even relatively small amounts between countries, because you have the war in the Ukraine and all of the Russian assets being frozen. You have everyone wanting to know exactly how did you make this money, where did it come from. It's really, and the banks have no incentive to actually make it efficient because they get money just by holding your money. So I don't know. I know it's a little bit off topic for what you said for negotiations, but I think there's so many innovations that we need to reduce the cost of moving money around, because there's just a lot of, I mean, maybe the banks just look at it as business. I just look at it as an overhead. So.
Excellent. Mr. David, are you with me? Sorry, I think he has.
Yeah, maybe we can wrap this up
Yeah.
early then.
Yeah. So, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Global trade is good. I think that we always need to look out for that. You can't look at it from an American perspective or a rich country perspective, because you have a distorted view that the world isn't like, the rich countries. The vast majority of it is in developing countries that, and just be sensitive to that is that global trade, following these lowest costs, have put us in a situation where we have these gigantic ships, and now it's made it have and have nots. Can you create a giant port, or can you not create a giant port? And looking at alternatives that allow large ships to go into small ports is something that I've been recently focused on and trying to solve. So I think, I think it's just global trade needs to be more global. Right now, it's global for a very select few and not very global for everyone else.
Thank you. This is excellent discussions, and we learn a lot about global trade. So hopefully we can organize more session like this. Thank you. Bye bye, and take care.